Neeson. He chose last week to reveal his inner monster, which he committed 40 years ago. And our society, our culture, social media lit up in total judgment and with absolute desire for justice for that sin that he did to be slayed. And the judgment fell on Liam Neeson really, really hard, and it fell on him brutally. There were calls for him to cancel all upcoming publicity shots. There were people who said he's never going to work again in the film industry. This is it for him. He is finished. But you know, if you read any of the articles about Liam Neeson, there was a division of opinion, because some people said, look, can it really be fair that something that this guy did 40 years ago in his past should be punished now? And yet other people said, look, there's got to be justice. You can't just allow monsters, even if they're just attitudes, to freely wander and roam. They must be challenged. There must be punishment. There must be justice. And I think deep down, I think we know that actually we're no different to Liam Neeson. Can I say that boldly? I think we all have secrets. I know I do. I know that our monsters, if I can put it like that, they just come out in different ways, don't they? And so I was thinking about this, and I think really in our society we're kind of set up to fail. We're kind of stuck. We live in a world which is daily provoking us to be cruel, to be disappointed, to be upset, to be victims, and yet we have no choice but to somehow pretend that life is fine and we're okay and it doesn't matter. Yet all the time we simultaneously absolutely fear that one day we'll let our guard down and we'll slip up, and our true selves will be revealed and will be judged, just like Liam was. And society will cast us out, because that's what society does when it wants judgment. And of course the tragedy is, and again we kind of know this, if we live a lie, it will be something that we pay for with our physical health, with our mental health, with our spiritual health. It'll all unravel. We heard that in the interview just now, didn't we? If you live a lie, it's almost as if your very stitches and seams of your whole life eventually just begin to pull apart. But you know, there is an alternative. There is a way to get true peace. Let me tell you what happened a few years ago. I have a brother, he looks a bit like me, just a little bit shorter. He went to university in London, and when he was a fresher, he was walking home one evening, and he was walking just down a normal residential street when he noticed a car began to pull up alongside him. And as he was walking down the street, the car kind of matched his speed and was just tracking. And then something changed. The car stopped, and he could hear both the doors open. So he began to walk a little bit more agitatedly, but then the footsteps were close up behind him, and suddenly there was a voice at his side that said, "Do you have the time?" And he looked round, and someone was asking him for the time. It seemed nothing, didn't it? So he put up his wrist to check his watch, and then someone from the other side he hadn't even noticed smashed him at the side of the head. The other guy took blows straight into his ribcage, pushed him to the floor. And then both of these guys started to viciously kick him in his torso, his arms, his head, his face, his teeth. They didn't rob him. They went for his phone. They didn't go for his wallet. They just laughed. He was able to push free, and he began to stagger as much as he could muster that as a run. And they got in their car and started to chase him down the road. The only thing that he could do is he he went into one of the gardens of one of the homes and he started to bang on the door, pleading with the person or the people inside, please let me in. Please let me in. And they didn't. And as he felt the lights of the car swing onto the back of his neck, he thought it was over and he pleaded with the people, you don't have to let me in, just call the police. For whatever reason, those two men didn't finish him off. And my brother was able to get home. They never opened the door. And I remember that night because he called me. And he could barely speak. And his voice was absolutely choked with tears. And as he explained what happened, he finished the conversation with this. He just wanted to pray for them. He just wanted to pray that they would find forgiveness for what they've done. He just wanted to pray that somehow they would come to know Jesus themselves. Isn't that remarkable? Why did he respond like that? How is it that as a victim of injustice, with his right side of his face caved in, that he could be so physically damaged and yet find himself even more loving? How could he be a victim of injustice and yet not become bitter and resentful? How could his inner monster not rise from the ashes of his broken body? And the answer is this. Jesus is more angry about injustice than you or I could ever be. And Jesus is the only person in human history who can do something serious about it once and for all. You see, my brother Luke knew Jesus, and he knew that Jesus had already slayed his personal monster, and that was the thing that changed his life, that meant that he could have peace, even in the midst of horrific suffering and injustice. How did Jesus do it? Well, come with me to Mark chapter 15. This is the eyewitness account that Tom so wonderfully read. And we heard in the passage that Jesus, who claims to be God, allows himself to be a victim of injustice in this passage. We read it together, didn't we? He undergoes a false trial. He undergoes a savage beating. And the evidence for Jesus' death on the cross, if you want to look into yourself, you're really welcome to. Almost every historian says it really did happen, that a man called Jesus of Nazareth really was crucified by Roman soldiers 2,000 years ago. If you were there, you would have seen it with your own eyes. In 1986, the American Medical Association looked at all of the evidence about crucifixion and what happened to Jesus, and they concluded from a scientific perspective, from a medical perspective, Jesus' death primarily resulted from hypovolemic shock, exhaustion, and asphyxia. You see, they said, look, we looked at the detail, and as the Roman soldiers repeatedly beat and struck the victim with the full force of iron balls, broken pieces of pottery and glass, it would have caused deep stretches of his flesh to fly off. It would have cut into his skin, and all of his subcutaneous tissue would have been stripped from the bone. As the flogging continued, the doctors said the lacerations would tear into his underlying skeletal muscles and produce quivering ribbons of bleeding flesh, leading to pain, blood loss, and circulatory shock. They concluded this: the extent of his blood loss on the cross will have determined how long the victim would have survived with the nails through his hands and his feet. Horrific, isn't it? Horrific. It was considered by the Romans the worst possible instrument of torture and death that there has ever been. If he was God, if he was really God, and that's what Christians claim, why would he allow himself to die so publicly? And so horrifically and so embarrassingly as this? Well, don't you see? In Mark's gospel, we're being told that Jesus on the cross is slaying a monster. And as he was slayed himself, my sin was being slayed too. A few chapters earlier in Mark's gospel, Jesus says this, explaining his death to come. He says, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for a many." He's talking about an exchange. That on the cross, Jesus took upon himself the monster in all of us. He took upon himself on the cross all of the injustice, that is, to use Bible language, all of the sin, all of the evil. And as he died, that monster was slain. And so permanently, for anyone who puts their trust in him, they are forgiven of every sin that they have ever done in their past, every sin that they're doing now, and any sin that they do in the future, paid for, forgiven, permanently, no more guilt. Justice is done. Just anger is spent. The punishment is given for all time. Justice is complete. And when Jesus is nailed to the cross, the monster is truly dead. That's the great exchange. He died so that we could live. And that's why my brother Luke, who allowed Jesus to slay his monster for him, he's not perfect, and I can say that because he's my brother. But he's so transformed by a deeper love and a deeper sense of peace that even in the midst of immense suffering, he can still love the ones who hurt him. After all, if someone chooses to die for you, that's such a big thing, isn't it? It changes you. It changes you. And if Jesus loves you so much that he would die for you, knowing all about your monster, knowing all about your secrets, then I guess it makes sense that you too would love others as radically as this, even when they seek to hurt you. So I guess therefore, if this is true, and I really believe it is, it leaves us all with two options. Option A is this: Jesus will slay your monster for you. He'll take your punishment on your behalf, and all of the mess of your sin, past, present, and future, he'll pay for it all, so that you can be free and so that you can receive such a radical love and therefore have a peace that means you can radically love others like you have never loved before. That's option A. And it's available this evening. And there's option B. Before I say option B, I need to tell you that Jesus promises that one day he's going to make a final end to all bad things. And one day in this very world, he promises that it's going to be a place where everyone can sleep in the dark without fear. Isn't that awesome? Where there'll be no more regrets and no more guilt and no more sadness and no more anger and no more injustice. That's what he promises one day he's going to bring. And so option B is this: if you will not allow him to die for you, then justice still needs to be done. And that justice will mean that you actually get what you want. And you'll have to deal with your monster, your sin, yourself. But you won't be doing it in his fear-free world that he's promised to bring. What will it be? Option A or option B? These are big questions, and I'm just going to give just a few moments really to reflect on that, and we're going to watch a short video.